The woman grabbed my hand in the middle of a crowded afternoon, pulled me toward her as if her life depended on it, and whispered, "Kiss me like you mean it. Please. Right now." I had never seen her before. I didn't know her name, her story, or why her hands were trembling so badly that she could barely hold mine. But when I looked over her shoulder and saw the man walking toward us with a furious expression, I realized this wasn't a romantic request. It was a desperate plea for help. And somehow, that single moment would lead both of us toward a truth neither of us was prepared to face. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can change a life, forgiveness can heal an old wound, hope can appear in the darkest moments, and everyone deserves a second chance, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Become part of our family and our community, because sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the beginning of someone's greatest second chance. My name is Everett Hale, and until that afternoon, I believed I had learned to keep strangers at a safe distance. I was 41, lived alone in a quiet apartment above a bakery, and spent most of my days repairing old furniture for people who wanted something beautiful restored instead of thrown away. There was something comforting about broken chairs, scratched tables, and cracked cabinets. Wood never pretended it wasn't damaged. You could see every scar, every split, every place where something had once gone wrong. And if you were patient enough, you could sand the rough edges, reinforce the weak places, and give the old thing another life. People were harder. People hid their cracks. That afternoon, I had just finished delivering a restored oak dining table to a small antiques shop downtown. The sun was bright, the sidewalks were crowded, and the city seemed unusually alive. Children were running through the fountain in the plaza, couples were carrying shopping bags, street musicians were playing near the courthouse steps, and people were rushing through their ordinary lives without knowing that one of those lives was about to collide with mine. I was crossing the plaza when a woman suddenly stepped directly in front of me. She looked to be in her late 30s, with auburn hair loosely tied behind her neck and a pale blue coat despite the warm weather. Her face was beautiful, but beauty was not what caught my attention. It was fear. Raw, unmistakable fear. Her eyes kept moving toward the street behind me. Then she grabbed my hand. Her fingers were cold. She leaned closer, and those trembling lips formed the words that changed everything. "Kiss me like you mean it. Please. Right now." For half a second, I thought I had misunderstood her. Then I saw him. A tall man in a gray jacket was approaching from across the plaza. His face was tight with anger, and he was moving straight toward us. The woman looked at him, then back at me. There was something in her expression that made me stop thinking about how strange the situation was. I gently placed my hands on her shoulders and pulled her into a brief embrace, making it look from a distance as though we were an affectionate couple who had just reunited. I didn't kiss her. I wasn't going to take advantage of someone who was frightened. Instead, I leaned close and whispered that she was safe and that she needed to tell me what was happening. The man stopped several feet away. The woman squeezed my hand harder. He stared at us for a moment, then muttered something I couldn't hear. After several tense seconds, he turned around and walked away. The woman didn't move. She stood beside me, staring after him until he disappeared into the crowd. Then she suddenly began crying. Not dramatic crying. Not the kind people do when they want attention. These were silent tears that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than what had just happened. Her name was Celeste Rowan. She told me she had met the man several years earlier when she was going through a difficult period in her life. He had seemed protective at first. He remembered little details about her, brought her coffee when she was exhausted, waited outside her workplace, and convinced her that his constant concern was proof of love. Slowly, however, concern became control. Questions became accusations. Affection became pressure. And every time Celeste tried to create distance, he found a way to make her feel guilty for doing it. She had finally left him months earlier. But he refused to accept that it was over. She had changed apartments. Changed her daily routine. Blocked his number. Asked friends to stop giving him information. Yet he kept appearing in places where she went, always claiming that he only wanted to talk. That afternoon, she had seen him following her through the plaza. She had panicked. Then she saw me. A stranger. Someone he wouldn't recognize. Someone who might make him believe she wasn't alone. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she wiped her eyes and apologized repeatedly for dragging me into her problem. I told her she didn't owe me an apology. Then I asked whether she had somewhere safe to go. She said she did. But when I asked if there was someone she trusted enough to call, she looked down. No one, she admitted. That answer stayed with me. Because I knew what it meant to have people around you and still feel completely alone. Years earlier, I had been married to a woman named Maribel. We had spent almost 11 years together. Our marriage hadn't ended because we stopped loving each other. It ended because we stopped knowing how to communicate our pain. After my father died, I withdrew from everyone. Maribel tried to reach me, but grief had turned me into a locked door. Instead of telling her I was struggling, I convinced myself that silence was strength. Eventually, she stopped knocking. Our divorce had been quiet, almost painfully civilized. There had been no betrayal. No dramatic affair. No villain. Just two people who had loved each other and failed to save something precious because neither knew how to ask for help. For years afterward, I blamed myself. That was why Celeste's fear affected me so deeply. I knew what it felt like to lose someone because you didn't know how to speak. I didn't know what it felt like to be afraid of someone you once trusted. But I knew loneliness. And loneliness could make a person accept things they never should. I helped Celeste contact a friend she had not spoken to in months. The friend agreed to meet her at a busy cafe nearby. Before she left, Celeste thanked me and said she couldn't understand why a complete stranger had helped her when people she knew had stopped answering her calls. I told her maybe strangers sometimes had an advantage. We didn't know enough about each other to judge. She smiled faintly. Then she asked for my number. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to help her, but because I understood how easily compassion could become attachment. Still, something in me told me this wasn't finished. I gave her my number. 3 days later, she called. She wasn't being followed. She wasn't in danger. She simply wanted to thank me properly. We met at a small cafe during the afternoon. Celeste arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee and a nervous smile. She told me she had spent years believing that needing help made her weak. That afternoon in the plaza had taught her something different. Sometimes asking for help was the bravest thing a person could do. We began talking. Not romantically. Not at first. We talked about ordinary things. Music. Books. Bad coffee. Childhood memories. The strange habits people developed when they lived alone. Then she told me about her mother. Her mother had died when Celeste was 26. Her father had been gone long before that. For most of her adult life, Celeste had felt responsible for everyone around her, even when nobody had asked her to be. She had spent years believing that if she could keep everyone happy, nobody would leave. I told her about Maribel. About the marriage I had ruined through silence. About the way I still sometimes wondered whether I had deserved a second chance. Celeste looked at me for a long time. Then she said something I never forgot. She told me that sometimes forgiveness wasn't about pretending the past hadn't happened. Sometimes forgiveness meant refusing to let the past decide what kind of person you would become. Those words reached a part of me I had kept locked away for years. Our friendship grew slowly. We met during the day. We walked through the farmer's market. We visited bookstores. We sat on park benches and talked until the afternoon shadows stretched across the pavement. And somewhere between those ordinary moments, something changed. Celeste began laughing again. I began talking again. She stopped looking over her shoulder every few minutes. I stopped thinking about my divorce every time I heard someone mention marriage. But the past was not finished with either of us. One afternoon, Celeste arrived at the cafe looking terrified. The man had contacted her again. He had sent her a message saying he knew she was seeing someone. He claimed I was manipulating her. He claimed she would eventually regret leaving him. Celeste wanted to disappear. Instead, I encouraged her to document everything and speak with the appropriate authorities and people she trusted. I told her she didn't need to fight him alone. For the first time, she didn't. She reported the harassment. She told her friend. She told her co-workers. She stopped protecting the person who had frightened her from the consequences of his own behavior. It wasn't easy. There were days when she doubted herself. Days when she wondered whether she had been too harsh. Days when she almost returned to the familiar because familiar felt safer than uncertain. But she kept moving forward. And then came the biggest surprise. One afternoon, I received a message from Maribel. She wanted to meet. I almost refused. Then I remembered Celeste's words about forgiveness. So I went. We sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant beneath the afternoon sunlight. Maribel looked older. So did I. But for the first time, neither of us looked angry. She told me she had spent years wondering whether she had abandoned me when I was grieving. I told her the truth. She hadn't. I had pushed her away because I didn't know how to survive my own pain. She cried. I cried too. And after all those years, I finally said the words I should have said when our marriage was falling apart. I'm sorry. She forgave me. Not because everything was suddenly okay. Not because we were going to get back together. She forgave me because she didn't want to carry the weight anymore. When I returned to the cafe where Celeste was waiting, I told her what had happened. She smiled. Then she took my hand. It was the same hand she had grabbed that first afternoon. But this time there was no fear in her touch. She looked into my eyes and reminded me of the day we met. She told me she had asked a stranger to pretend to love her because she was terrified of being hurt. Now she wanted something different. She didn't want someone to pretend. She wanted someone who meant it. I didn't answer immediately. I simply held her hand. Then I told her that I couldn't promise her a perfect life. I couldn't promise that neither of us would ever be afraid again. I couldn't promise that the past would never hurt. But I could promise that if she ever became afraid, I would listen. If she ever needed space, I would respect it. If she ever made a mistake, I would talk to her instead of disappearing. And if I ever became lost inside my own pain, would ask for help instead of shutting the door. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. She leaned toward me. This time, there was no stranger chasing her. No fear. No performance. No desperate need to convince someone else of anything. Just two wounded people sitting in the afternoon sunlight, finally understanding that love wasn't about pretending to be someone's rescue. It was about becoming a safe place where two people could be honest. Months later, Celeste opened a small counseling and support center with two friends who had helped her through the worst part of her recovery. She wanted other people who felt trapped, isolated, or ashamed to know that asking for help wasn't weakness. I kept restoring furniture. But something about my work changed. I began carving small words into the underside of every piece I restored. Words nobody would see unless they turned the furniture over. Hope. Courage. Forgiveness. Begin again. Celeste once asked why I did it. I told her because broken things deserved reminders that their scars weren't the end of their story. She smiled and said maybe people needed those reminders too. She was right. And one warm afternoon, almost a year after the day she grabbed my hand, we walked through the same plaza where we had first met. The fountain was running. Children were laughing. Musicians were playing. The city was moving around us. Celeste stopped beneath the sunlight and looked at me. She took my hand. Then she smiled. There was no fear in her eyes. Only peace. She told me that when she first asked me to kiss her, she wasn't asking for romance. She was asking someone to convince a dangerous person that she wasn't alone. But somewhere along the way, she discovered something much more important. She had never truly needed someone to save her. She needed someone to remind her that she was worth saving herself. And I realized I had needed the same thing. I had spent years believing my greatest failure was losing my marriage. But perhaps my greatest failure would have been allowing that loss to convince me I had nothing left to give. Celeste didn't erase my past. I didn't erase hers. We simply stopped letting our past control our future. That was the real miracle. Not that two strangers met. Not that fear turned into affection. Not even that two wounded hearts found each other. The miracle was that two people who had once believed they were too broken to begin again discovered that brokenness was not the opposite of love. Sometimes it was the place where love learned how to grow. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. And before we finish, I want you to leave one meaningful comment. What do you believe is harder, asking someone for help, forgiving someone who hurt you, or forgiving yourself for the person you used to be? Your answer might be exactly what someone in our community needs to hear today. As for Celeste and me, we never forgot that first afternoon. She once asked me whether I remembered the exact moment she grabbed my hand. I told her I remembered everything. The fear in her eyes. The trembling in her fingers. The desperate whisper. And the realization that sometimes a stranger enters your life not because you are meant to save them, but because, without knowing it, you are both about to save a part of yourselves. She smiled and squeezed my hand. This time, neither of us needed to pretend. We simply kept walking beneath the afternoon sun, side by side, carrying our scars with us, no longer ashamed of them. Because we had finally learned that a second chance doesn't always arrive looking like a miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a trembling hand reaching for yours. Sometimes it arrives as forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives as the courage to walk away. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it arrives as a stranger who whispers, "Please," and gives you the chance to remind them, and yourself, that there is still hope. If you want, I can also create a YouTube SEO package for this story with a description, keywords, hashtags, and a highly clickable thumbnail title.